Using politics to segregate the sexes. It seems like a million years ago that men and women would have sex and start popping out babies without ever thinking about politics. Nowadays, men and women hardly talk to one another because politics get in the way. If you've been unlucky enough to find yourself anywhere near a computer over the past 10 years, you've seen headline after headline announcing that politics are cock-blocking men and women from getting together and getting it on. Politics are increasingly a dating deal-breaker, especially for women. Most Democrats who are looking for a relationship would not consider dating a Trump voter. The partisan marriage gap is bigger than ever. From swiping to sexting, the enduring gender divide in American dating and relationships. Political differences would make 3 in 5 people dump their partner. Back around 2015-2016, when I found myself in the emotionally harrowing and sexually shameful position of using dating apps to snag some tail, there were at least 2 instances where the fact that I didn't raise my right hand and swear before God and man that Donald Trump was Satan incarnate meant I would be spending the night alone. Just like most things in this savagely unequal world, the sexual political divide doesn't cut equally from left to right and from female to male. According to my own observations, and from the polls I've seen, leftists are far more adamant about refusing to share bodily fluids with the other side than those who lean right. And women are far more likely to dry up at the prospect of coitus with a male conservative than men are prone to going limp at the thought of humping a liberal chick. According to a recent study that combined results from 2 separate polls taken in May and September, the sexual political chasm seems especially wide between the young. Quoting, "This gender gap is most pronounced for 18 to 34-year-olds. There is a 21-point gap between the percentage of women and men under 35 who consider themselves to be progressive or liberal. This gap is slightly smaller among those aged 35 to 49, 18 points. However, this gap collapses among the 50 to 64, 9 points, and 65 plus, 7 points, age cohorts. Are older people naturally more politically compatible? Or, heaven forfend, have hostile forces purposely started driving a political wedge between the sexes, especially those of breeding age? To me, the most interesting takeaway from the survey is that fully 50% of women, but only 29% of men would see it as a red flag if their potential date said they didn't care about politics. Based on this poll, women these days are more histrionic and militant about politics than men are. They'll use politics as an excuse to avoid having sex, or at least to avoid having sex with men. It wasn't always this way. In 2015, a survey by dating site Match.com found that 78% of singles would date someone from across the aisle in its annual Singles in America survey. Only 7 years later, that quotient had nosedived down to 46%. Believe it or not, way back in the days before people lived entirely online and social media started microwaving their brains to the point where they couldn't handle anything more complicated than memes, people had sex because they were sexually attracted to one another. They'd meet for dinner, charm the pants off one another, and perpetuate the species. Now they're simply replicating talking points and barking at anyone who disagrees. In the process, the line between personal and political identity has been obliterated. There are no real people anymore, only walking, talking campaign ads. The political blue and red are as savagely polarized as Crips and Bloods. In a culture that permits only 2 cults, there's no longer any middle ground, no agreeing to disagree. In a world that mandates fanaticism and treats individuality as blasphemy, there is no difference between one's sexual preferences and one's politics. If you don't want to have sex, that's fine. But you must have politics. If your political differences make it impossible for you to even talk to one another, the odds of you eventually stripping down and mating will plummet to zero. Is this all a coincidence, or has it been orchestrated? The term natural increase refers to births outpacing deaths in a given demographic. For white people, natural increase ended in 2016 when deaths began outpacing births. In 2016, 39,000 more white Americans died than were born. Compare this to 1999, when 393,000 more whites were born than died. I vaguely remember 1999. It was a much sexier time. It was before smartphones existed, and social media was inescapable, and everything you thought and did was bogged down with political baggage. It's when people thought of one another as, well, people, rather than noble comrades or ignoble enemies. It was before political monomania poisoned everyday life, before being hyper-connected paradoxically led to mass alienation. In 1800, the average American woman of childbearing age, who back then was statistically far likelier to be white than the average American woman is now, had 7 children. In 2021, the white fertility rate was a mere 1.6, which is well below the replacement fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman. For years, I've felt that the brain-battering levels of political polarization we're seeing is merely an organic sign of a society ready to collapse, and that people instinctually pick sides because they sense a war over food and shelter is coming. But more and more I'm wondering to what degree this has all been manufactured. When society shifted so that women were encouraged to get out of the kitchen and go to college, it enabled them to take control of their bodies and lean politically leftward. As leftism increasingly became vocally and maliciously anti-male, it forced men to flee toward the right. Conspiracies are real. Any honest reading of history would reveal that unless groups conspire to gain and hold on to power, another more Machiavellian group will come along and dethrone them. To my consternation, I found that people are far more likely to believe the earth is flat, or that the CIA is spiking the water supply with hormones to make frogs gay, than they are willing to entertain the idea that the political left and right are purposely manufactured illusions designed to divide people. What if political polarization has been a scheme all along? One designed to foment hostility between the sexes and drive down birth rates. I have no evidence for my little hypothesis. It's merely a sick hunch. But even if it's purely coincidence, ideological division is leading to demographic disaster.
The White Panther.